The wind in the Hindu Kush doesn't whisper. It screams. Staff Sergeant Reese Harlow pressed her cheek against the cold limestone, feeling the mountain's ancient indifference vibrate through her skull. 400 meters below, through the Leopold Mark V scope, the lead MRAP of Bravo Company rolled deeper into the throat of the valley. The dust trail behind the convoy hung in the air like a funeral shroud, golden in the late afternoon sun. Her finger hovered over the trigger guard, not yet on the trigger itself, not yet making the choice that would either save 64 men or condemn them all, herself included. Do not engage. The voice in her earpiece was her own memory playing on a broken loop. The last transmission she'd received before the radios died, before the world went silent except for the wind and the mathematics of death. I repeat, do not engage. Through the scope, she could see the turret gunner in the lead vehicle adjusting his helmet strap. He looked young. They all looked young. 20 years old, maybe 21. The same age her brother Daniel had been when this valley swallowed him whole. Reese's breathing was controlled mechanical. 4 seconds in. Hold 4. 4 seconds out. The rhythm of a sniper, the heartbeat of someone who kills from a distance and lives with it afterward. If there was an afterward. She shifted her weight microscopically, ignoring the sharp bite of gravel through the ghillie suit. The camouflage netting draped over her shoulders made her part of the mountain invisible to anyone scanning from below. But she wasn't worried about below. She was worried about across. 800 meters across the valley on the opposing ridgeline, 3 men with rifles were hunting her. She couldn't see them. Not directly, but she knew they were there. She'd seen the glint of a scope lens 20 minutes ago quickly suppressed. She'd seen the unnatural stillness of a hide position that was too perfect, too deliberate. Counter-snipers, professionals, men who killed snipers for a living. And they were waiting for her to take a shot, any shot. The moment her rifle spoke, the acoustic crack would echo across the canyon. Her muzzle flash, even suppressed, would be a beacon. They would triangulate her position in seconds. She would be dead 30 seconds after pulling the trigger. The lead MRAP hit a pothole. The suspension absorbed it with a metallic groan that carried up the valley walls. 350 meters now. The math was getting tighter, the variables narrowing to a single point of convergence where action and consequence became the same thing. Reese closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the darkness reset her vision. When she opened them again, she wasn't seeing the convoy. She was seeing 48 hours ago, 48 hours earlier. The dust storm came out of nowhere, as they always did in Arghandab Valley. One moment the sky was a washed-out blue, the kind of pale emptiness that made you forget color existed anywhere in the world. The next, the horizon turned brown, a wall of churning particulate matter, rolling toward them like the wrath of an angry god. Wraith 6, this is Wraith 2. Reese's voice was calm on the radio, even as she pulled her shemagh up over her nose and mouth. We've got weather inbound, big weather. Request immediate extract coordinates. The response came back through static, choppy, but readable. Wraith 2-6, negative on extract. All birds grounded. Find hard cover and ride it out. We'll pull you when it clears. Master Sergeant Graham Aldridge, call sign Wraith 6, was 30 meters ahead of her on the goat trail. Even through the gathering dust, she could see him signal the team to take cover. 5 operators, 5 of the best reconnaissance soldiers in the regiment. They'd been in country for 6 weeks, mapping enemy movement patterns in a sector so remote that satellite imagery was useless. The storm hit like a freight train. Visibility dropped to 0 in seconds. The world became a choking brown fog, thick enough to taste gritty enough to feel grinding between her teeth, even through the cloth. Reese dropped to one knee, shouldering her pack to create a windbreak. She could hear the others on the team net their voices, fragmented by the interference. Can't see. Hold position. Meters east. And then nothing. Not static, not white noise. Just silence. Reese keyed her radio. Wraith 6, this is 2. Radio check. Nothing. Any station, this is Wraith 2, radio check. The silence was absolute, oppressive. It pressed against her eardrums like water pressure at depth. She checked her PRC 152 handheld. The display was dark. Not low battery, not a frequency error, just dead. She cycled the power switch. Nothing. She pulled the battery, inspected the contacts, reseated it. Still nothing. EMP. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. An electromagnetic pulse device. The kind of thing that cost serious money and required serious expertise to deploy. The kind of thing that meant this wasn't random. Someone knew they were here. The dust storm wasn't natural cover, it was camouflage for an attack. Reese's training took over, overriding the spike of adrenaline. She pulled her backup compass from her vest, orienting herself to the ridgeline they had been paralleling. Graham's last known position was 30 meters northwest. She began moving, keeping low, using the limited visibility as both shield and liability. The wind tore at her, trying to push her off the narrow trail. Each step was a negotiation with gravity and momentum. She counted her paces. 30 meters, 40, 50. Where the hell was the team? At 70 meters, she found the first body, Specialist Morrison, 24 years old, father of twin girls back in Georgia. He was lying on his back, arms spread wide, staring up at the brown sky with eyes that saw nothing. The entry wound was small, precise, center mass just below the sternum. Sniper shot. Professional work. Reese dropped beside him, checking for a pulse she knew wouldn't be there. Morrison's rifle was still slung across his chest. He hadn't even had time to unsling it. She moved on every sense, screaming warnings. The dust was thinning now, the worst of the storm passing as quickly as it had arrived. Visibility extended to 50 meters, then 100. She found Corporal Zhang next, then Sergeant Briggs. Both dead, both killed with single shots from distance executed with cold precision while blind and choking in the storm. The team was gone. She was alone, except for Graham. She found him at the base of a boulder cluster, partially shielded from the wind. He was alive, but barely. The shot had taken him low, punching through the gap between his plate carrier and his belt. Femoral artery. The ground beneath him was dark with blood. Reese slid into cover beside him, her hands already moving to apply pressure to the wound. "Graham, stay with me. I've got you." His eyes opened pale blue against dust-caked skin. For a moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Then focus returned, sharp and clear despite the blood loss. "Reese." His voice was a rasp, wet at the edges. They knew. They knew we were coming. "Don't talk. Save your strength." She was ripping open a pressure bandage, her fingers working with the muscle memory of 100 training iterations. But even as she worked, she could see the truth. The blood wasn't slowing. The wound was too deep, the damage too catastrophic. Graham grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me. No time." He coughed and blood flecked his lips. "Your brother, Daniel. Same valley, 2009. Don't let it happen again." The words hit her like shrapnel. Daniel, her twin. The other half of her soul torn away 3 years ago in an ambush, 15 kilometers from where they sat now. "Graham, my rifle." He was fumbling at his chest rig with his free hand, trying to reach the M2010 sniper rifle slung across his back. "Take it. 237 kills. You make it 238. Stop talking like that. Medevac is coming. Will, no birds. You know that." His grip tightened on her wrist, urgent now. "The rifle. Everything I know. It's yours now. You're better than I ever was. Better than Daniel. You see things. Terrain. Angles. You see what's not there." Reese felt her throat closing. "I can't." "You can. You will." Graham's hand released her wrist, moving to the custom leather sling of his rifle. "Someone's out there, hunting us, hunting anyone who sees too much. They're not Taliban. They're too good. Foreign fighters. Professionals." He managed to unsling the rifle, the effort costing him. The weapon was a thing of lethal beauty. A Remington M2010 enhanced sniper rifle customized with a Leopold Mark 5 HD scope, Atlas bipod, and a suppressor that looked like it had been handcrafted. The stock was worn smooth by years of use, marked with tiny notches. 237 of them. "The valley," Graham whispered, his voice fading. "There's something in the valley, big, coordinated. I saw it before we got hit. Positions, hides, it's an ambush. Professional work." "For who?" "Anyone, everyone, they're waiting." His eyes were losing focus, the pale blue fading to gray. "You have to warn them. Whoever comes next, you have to." The rest of the sentence died with him. Reese knelt there for 10 seconds, watching the life drain from a man who had been more than a mentor, more than a commander. Graham Aldrich had trained her, and Daniel together had pushed them harder than anyone else in the regiment, had believed in them when the old guard brass still thought women didn't belong behind a rifle scope. He had been the closest thing to a father she'd had since her own died in a mining accident when she was 12. Now he was gone. Reese reached out and closed his eyes. Then she took the rifle. The weight of it settled across her shoulders like a mantle. 237 confirmed kills and the ghost of the man who made them. She left the bodies where they lay. Moving them was impossible. Calling for extract was impossible. The radios were dead. The storm had scattered them across a kilometer of hostile terrain, and somewhere out there, the people who had killed them were still hunting. Reese was alone in the mountains with enemies she couldn't see and a warning she couldn't deliver. She began to climb. The ridgeline was a knife edge of limestone and shale thrust up by tectonic violence millions of years ago and weathered down by wind and time. Reese moved along it with the patience of stone, every step calculated, every shift of weight considered. She was exhausted. The climb had taken 6 hours, most of it spent in a controlled scramble across terrain that would kill her if she made one mistake. Her hands were raw inside her gloves. Her shoulders ached from the weight of her pack and Graham's rifle. The wound on her ribs where she'd scraped against a rock ledge burned with every breath. But she was high, higher than anything else in the valley, higher than the enemy if they were still below. She found a hide position just before sunset, a natural depression in the rock overhung by a limestone shelf. It offered concealment from above and a commanding view of the valley floor 300 feet below. She arranged her ghillie suit wove in local vegetation and settled in to wait. The valley revealed itself slowly as the light faded and her eyes adjusted. It was beautiful in a stark and terrible way. The Argandeb River cut through the center, a thin ribbon of muddy brown water flanked by struggling vegetation. The valley walls rose on both sides, jagged and hostile, painted in shades of gray and tan and the deep purple of shadow. And on the southern slope, barely visible, even with her scope, were the signs Graham had died trying to warn her about. Reese glassed the terrain with methodical precision, working a grid pattern. At first she saw nothing, just rocks and scrub brush and the occasional scraggly tree clinging to life in the harsh soil. Then her eye caught something wrong. A shadow that fell at the incorrect angle for the sun's position. She adjusted her scope's focus, cranking the magnification to 20 power. There, beneath what looked like a natural pile of rocks, the faint sheen of thermal blankets. Mylar, the cheap kind used in survival kits, effective at masking heat signatures from aerial drones. Someone had draped them over a position and then covered them with dirt and loose stone. It was a hide, a fighting position, and it wasn't alone. Reese began to map the ambush site with the cold precision of a surgeon examining a tumor. Position 400 meters down the valley floor, just past a hairpin turn in the road. A DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine gun, Soviet era, but maintained with care. The weapon was capable of punching through the armor of an MRAP at this range. It was positioned to fire straight down the road, creating a fatal funnel where vehicles would be forced to slow for the turn. Position 2, 300 meters to the east, elevated 30 feet above the road. An RPG team, 3 men dug into spider holes with overhead cover. Their angle was perfect for a top-down shot on vehicle roofs, where the armor was thinnest. Position 3, another RPG team, this one on the western slope mirroring the first. Position 4, a third RPG team further back covering the rear of any convoy that entered the kill zone. Position 5, a fourth team insurance against anyone trying to reverse out. It was an L-shaped ambush textbook, perfect, executed with professional discipline. The DSHK would stop the lead vehicle. The RPGs would destroy the rest. Anyone who survived the initial volley would be cut down by small arms fire from the spider holes. It was a meat grinder, a kill box, a carefully engineered death trap, and it was waiting for someone. Reese pulled back from her scope, processing what she'd seen. This wasn't a hasty ambush thrown together by local fighters. This was planned, coordinated, supplied. The thermal blankets alone suggested funding and training beyond what the local Taliban cells possessed. Graham's last words echoed in her mind. Foreign fighters, professionals. She was looking at the work of men who killed for a living and did it very, very well. The question was, who were they waiting for? The answer came 20 minutes later, announced by the low rumble of diesel engines echoing up the valley. Reese swung her scope toward the sound, her heart rate spiking for the first time since Graham died. Vehicles, multiple vehicles, American. She counted them as they rounded the far bend, still 3 kilometers away but closing steadily. 4 MRAPs, Mine-resistant ambush, protected vehicles, massive six-wheeled fortresses designed to survive IED blasts and small arms fire. They moved in a standard patrol column, 50-meter spacing turret gunners traversing their weapons with the bored confidence of men who'd made this drive 100 times. Reese zoomed in on the lead vehicle. The bumper markings were visible even at this distance. Bravo Company, 75th Ranger Regiment. 64 men, brothers, warriors, Americans, rolling straight toward annihilation. Reese's hand moved to her radio on instinct, reaching for the transmit button. Then she remembered. Dead. All of it dead. The EMP had fried every electronic component in her kit. She pulled out her backup signaling mirror, a simple piece of polished metal the size of a playing card. She could flash them, reflect sunlight at the lead driver's viewport, force them to stop and investigate. But even as she positioned the mirror, she saw the problem. 800 meters across the valley on the opposite ridgeline, three positions she'd initially missed now revealed themselves in her mind's eye. The angles were wrong for ambush positions facing the road. They were elevated, dug into the high ground, oriented not toward the valley floor, but toward her side of the canyon. Counter-sniper positions. Someone on the enemy team had thought this through. They'd known that this ridgeline was the only position an American spotter or sniper would choose. They'd known that someone might try to interfere, and they'd set their own trap within the trap, a hunter's blind, aimed at anyone foolish enough to try to play hero. If Reese used the mirror, the flash would give away her position instantly. The counter-snipers would have her location before the Rangers even understood what the signal meant. If she fired her rifle, same result. The acoustic crack would echo across the valley, and her muzzle flash, even with Graham's suppressor, would be visible for a fraction of a second. Enough time for a professional to acquire the target. 3 counter-snipers. 3 angles of fire. At least one of them would have a clear shot at her hide. She would die. And the Rangers would still drive into the kill zone because dead women don't shout warnings. Reese lowered the mirror, her mind racing through the tactical calculus. Option A, do nothing. Stay silent. The Rangers die, but she lives. She can extract after dark, hike to friendly lines, report what she saw. The intelligence might save lives somewhere else someday. Option B, shoot. Take out the DSHK gunner or one of the RPG teams. Buy the Rangers a few seconds of confusion. She dies immediately after, and the ambush still wipes out the convoy because she can't kill all the positions before the counter-snipers end her. Option C, signal. Use the mirror, use flares, use anything to warn them. Die instantly. Rangers might understand the warning, might not. 50-50 chance they survive. None of the options save both her and the convoy. The mathematics of death were brutally simple. 64 lives on one side of the equation. 1 life on the other. There was no solution that balanced. Except. Reese looked through the scope again, this time ignoring the ambush positions and the approaching convoy. She looked at the terrain itself. Her father's voice came back to her, a memory from childhood. Morgan Harlow had been a mining engineer, a man who spent his career studying rock and stone and the hidden structures that determined what stood and what fell. Limestone is sedimentary, Reese, built up layer by layer over millions of years. And that means it has weaknesses, fault lines, stress points. Find the keystone and you can bring down the whole structure. She'd been 12 when he said that, helping him survey a played-out copper mine in Arizona. He'd shown her how to read the rock face, how to spot the places where the stone wanted to fail, where nature was waiting for the right push to let gravity do its work. 2 years later, he died when a mineshaft collapsed in Nevada. The investigation found that someone had missed the signs, had failed to see the fault line running through the ceiling. Her father had seen it, but he'd been overruled by bosses who wanted production over safety. Daniel had joined the army a month after the funeral. Reese followed him 6 months later. They'd both been running from the guilt of surviving from the weight of knowledge that should have saved a life but didn't. Now high in the Hindu Kush, Reese saw what no one else could see. Above the DSHK position, the valley wall bulged outward in a pregnant slope of limestone and loose shale. The rock face wasn't solid. It was layered, held together by friction and gravity and the single jutting spur of stone at its base. A keystone. And tucked into a fissure directly beneath that keystone, barely visible, even with magnification, were stacked wooden crates. Old Soviet ammunition boxes, repurposed. The stenciled Cyrillic markings were faded but readable. 152-meter artillery shells. Reese's breath caught. The enemy had stockpiled their resupply cache directly under a geological time bomb. They'd chosen the position for the shade for the natural concealment. They had no idea they'd parked several hundred pounds of high explosives beneath a rock formation that was one stress fracture away from catastrophic failure. She ran the calculations in her head, visualizing the shot with the clarity of a technical schematic. Range 1,000 meters, nearly two-thirds of a mile. At the extreme edge of effective range for the M2010, angle 28 degrees downward, steep enough that gravity would significantly affect the bullet's trajectory. Wind, the valley was a wind tunnel. She watched the dust devils spinning on the road, saw the way the scrub brush bent, 8 to 10 miles per hour at mid-range left to right. But at the target where the canyon walls funneled the air differently, the wind would shift, 5 miles per hour right to left, a switching wind, the nightmare scenario for long-range shooting. Target not the men, not the machine gun. The bottom crate of the explosive stack, where the weight bore down, heaviest where a single point of failure would cause the entire pile to detonate upward, venting into the underside of the limestone spur. If she missed, the bullet would spark harmlessly off stone. The counter-snipers would kill her. The rangers would die. If she hit the target but her geology was wrong, the explosion would vent outward, making noise but leaving the ambush positions intact. The counter-snipers would kill her. The rangers would die. If she hit the target and the geology was right, the explosion would crack the keystone. The entire cliff face, hundreds of tons of limestone, would shear off and slide directly down onto the DSHK position, burying it under 30 feet of rock. The psychological shock might scatter the RPG teams. The rangers might survive, and she would still die, because the counter-snipers would see her muzzle flash and end her before the echoes faded. But 64 men might live. Reese looked down at Graham's rifle. The stock was warm from the sun, worn smooth by years of use. She counted the notches. 237. Each one a life ended at distance, a decision made and executed with professional detachment. Graham had been good at that. The detachment. The cold calculus. He'd told her once that the secret to being a great sniper was learning to stop seeing targets as people. You saw them as problems to solve, equations to balance. Reese had never been good at that part. She'd never stopped seeing the faces, never stopped wondering about the lives attached to the crosshairs. It was why some of the instructors at sniper school had doubted her, had questioned whether she had the temperament for the work. But she'd passed anyway, because when the mission required it, when the math demanded it, she could make the shot. She could live with the faces afterward. She wondered if she could live with her own face afterward. Probably not, because she wouldn't be alive to try. The convoy was 2 kilometers out now. She could see the details through the scope. The turret gunner in the lead vehicle was young, early 20s, with the lean frame of someone who'd been in country long enough to stop eating regularly. He was scanning his sector with professional attention, weapon ready, eyes alert. He had no idea that 400 meters ahead, a DSHK was tracking his vehicle with mechanical patience. Reese adjusted her position, settling her elbows into the limestone with agonizing care. She pulled Graham's rifle tight into the pocket of her shoulder, feeling the familiar pressure. She flipped up the scope covers, cranking the magnification to 18 power. The target swam into focus. The bottom crate, weathered wood held together by rusting metal straps. Through the gaps in the slats, she could see the dull gray of artillery shells, 1,000 meters away, barely visible. Smaller than a shoebox from this distance. She checked her dope card, the laminated chart taped to the rifle stock that listed bullet drop and wind drift at various ranges. Graham's handwriting cramped and precise. At 1,000 meters with the 220-grain MK248 Mod 1 ammunition, she needed to aim 35 feet above the target just to account for gravity. She was aiming at empty air and praying the bullet would fall exactly where physics dictated. Reese's hand moved to the turret on top of the scope, making the adjustments. Click, click, click. Each click represented 1 minute of angle, a tiny adjustment that would move the bullet's impact point by 10 inches at this range. Elevation 13.5 minutes. Windage, she'd have to hold off target by hand, using the reticle markings to compensate for the wind drift. The convoy was 1,500 meters out. Reese controlled her breathing, forcing her heart rate down. This was the part where training took over, where the thousands of practice rounds fired on ranges from Fort Benning to Afghanistan became muscle memory. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. On the empty lungs at the natural respiratory pause, the body is most still. That's when you break the trigger. The lead MRAP was at 1,000 meters, now closing the distance to the kill zone. The turret gunner reached up and adjusted his helmet strap, a casual gesture that somehow made him more human, more real. He looked exactly like Daniel. Not literally, the features were different, but the age, the build, the way he moved with the unconscious confidence of youth that didn't truly believe death was possible. Daniel had moved like that, right up until the moment an RPG had torn through his vehicle and ended him in fire and shrapnel. Reese felt something break open in her chest, a wound she'd thought was scarred over, but had only been buried. Not again, she whispered to the empty air, to the ghost of her brother, to the universe that had taken him, and was now demanding she choose between her life and 64 strangers. Never again. She chambered around the bolt, sliding forward with smooth mechanical precision. The 2020 grain bullet seated itself in the chamber, ready to fly Minami. Ready to become the 238th notch on Graham's rifle, or a miss that cost everything. The convoy was 800 meters from the kill zone. Reese settled her cheek against the stock, welding herself to the weapon. The scope's reticle was a precise pattern of lines and dots, reference points for judging distance and wind. She placed the crosshair 35 feet above the target crate, holding left to compensate for the wind. The world narrowed down to that single point of focus. Everything else, the pain in her ribs, the exhaustion, the fear, faded to background static. 600 meters, she watched the wind. Not the gusts, which were unpredictable, but the pattern. The valley breathed in cycles, drawing air up from the desert floor and pushing it back down as the temperature shifted. She saw the scrub grass settle, saw the dust devils die. A lull was coming, a moment of relative calm between the chaos. 400 meters. Across the valley on the opposite ridgeline, she saw movement. Just a flicker, barely perceptible. One of the counter snipers was adjusting position, getting comfortable. He knew someone might be watching. He was waiting for that someone to make a mistake. Reese was about to give him exactly what he wanted. Her thumb moved to the safety selector, a small lever on the right side of the rifle. She pressed it down. The weapon was hot, live, ready to kill. 300 meters. The lead vehicle's front tires touched the shadow of the hairpin turn, the point of no return. If they continued another 50 meters, they would be centered in the kill zone, perfectly positioned for the DSHK to tear them apart. Reese exhaled half her breath and held it. The wind lulled. The world held its breath with her. Her finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself, taking up the slack. The M2010's trigger was set at 3.5 pounds of pressure. Light enough to break clean, heavy enough to prevent accidents. She began to squeeze. Not pulling, not jerking. Squeezing. Steady, increasing pressure applied with the pad of her index finger. 2 pounds, 3 pounds. In her mind, she saw Daniel's face. Not as he'd looked in death, burned and broken, but as he'd been the last time they'd talked via satellite phone. Laughing about something stupid one of his team members had done. Alive. Full of impossible plans for after the deployment. She saw Graham bleeding out in the dust, pressing his rifle into her hands. She saw her father trapped under a mountain because someone hadn't trusted his expertise. And she saw the young gunner in the turret adjusting his helmet strap, unaware that he had 15 seconds left to live unless she did the impossible. 3.5 pounds. The trigger broke with a crisp snap. The rifle roared. The recoil slammed into Reese's shoulder like a kick from an angry mule driving her back against the limestone. Even with the suppressor, the report was a thunderclap, a compressed explosion that shattered the silence of the valley and announced her presence to every living thing within 2 kilometers. But she didn't flinch. She rode the recoil, forcing her eye to stay locked behind the scope, forcing her body to reacquire the sight picture through the violent jump of the optic. A sniper's work isn't finished when the trigger breaks. The shot is only the beginning of the prayer. The bullet, 220 grains of copper-jacketed lead, was now screaming downrange at 2,800 feet per second. A small piece of precision-engineered metal that had cost the United States government approximately $3.40, traveling on a ballistic arc that would either save 64 lives or condemn them all. Time of flight, 1.42 seconds. In movies, bullets travel instantaneously. Point shoot impact. In reality, at this distance, the projectile was making a journey. It had to cross 1,000 meters of hostile airspace, fighting wind and gravity, and its own gradual deceleration as friction with the atmosphere bled off velocity. Reese couldn't control it anymore. The bullet was an orphan now surrendered to physics. All she could do was watch. Zero point 0.3 seconds. The bullet crossed the first 300 meters, still supersonic, still stable. The crack of its passage, the sonic boom created by breaking the sound barrier, ripped through the air above the valley floor. To the rangers below, it would sound like a whip crack from nowhere, a sound without obvious source. To the counter-snipers across the valley, it was an alarm bell. Through her peripheral vision, Reese saw the muzzle flash from her own weapon. It was brief, barely a flicker, but in the shadows of the mountain it stood out like a spotlight. Her position was compromised. The only question now was how fast the enemy would react. 0.7 seconds. The bullet reached the chaotic mid-valley airstream where the wind conditions she tried to calculate became reality. The crosswinds hit it, shoving the projectile laterally. Reese had held left, compensating for the drift, but wind was never uniform. It gusted and swirled, channeled by the canyon walls into turbulent eddies that could push a bullet 3 feet off course. Through the scope, she could see the heat mirage boiling off the rocks, the visual distortion that marked the invisible rivers of air. The bullet was in there now, being buffeted, its perfect arc degrading into something more chaotic. Push, she thought. Push back. Damn you, push. As if answering her will, a blast of hot air rose from the valley floor, a thermal updraft caused by the sun-baked rocks releasing their stored heat. It slammed into the side of the tiny projectile, shoving it back toward the center line of her aim. 1.1 seconds. The bullet began its terminal descent, dropping below the sound barrier, starting to destabilize slightly as the aerodynamics changed. It had lost velocity, lost perfection, but it was still on path, still falling toward the target with the inevitability of gravity. Reese's sight picture stabilized. She could see clearly, now could see the target area in sharp detail. The wooden crate, weathered, ancient, packed with enough explosive power to level a city block. 1.42 seconds. Impact. The bullet didn't just hit the crate, it annihilated it. The heavy 220-grain projectile, still carrying over 2,000 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, punched through the wooden slats like they were wet paper. It tunneled through the packing material inside straw and burlap preserved by the dry climate and struck the nose of a 152-millimeter artillery shell. For a microsecond, nothing happened. The bullet's copper jacket peeled away, the lead core deformed, and the friction generated by the impact created a point of heat hotter than the surface of the sun. Then the universe caught fire. The explosion wasn't a fireball. Not at first. It was a flash of white light so intense that Reese's scope optic automatically darkened the protective coatings, struggling to save her retina from permanent damage. The light bloomed from deep within the fissure, expanding faster than thought, a sphere of superheated gas and pressure that had nowhere to go but up. The stack of crates didn't burn. It detonated. All of them at once, a sympathetic explosion that turned several hundred pounds of Soviet-era ordnance into a shaped charge aimed directly at the roof of the fissure. Through the scope, Reese saw the limestone spur, the keystone her father had taught her to recognize, lift off its seat. Just an inch, maybe two, suspended on a cushion of explosive force, held aloft for a frozen moment, while physics decided what came next. Then gravity reclaimed it. The spur slammed back down, but the stone had already failed. The shockwave from below had propagated through the layered sedimentary rock, finding every fault line, every stress fracture, every weakness accumulated over millions of years. The limestone didn't crack. It shattered. The sound reached Reese a moment later. Not the sharp crack of the explosion, but something deeper, more fundamental. A grinding roar that vibrated through the mountain itself, transmitted through solid rock into her chest, her bones, her teeth. It was the sound of the earth screaming. The cliff face above the DSHK position groaned, tilted, and then sheared off. Hundreds of tons of limestone shale and loose scree began to slide, gathering speed, transforming from solid matter into a fluid wave of destruction. Reese watched through the scope as the landslide poured down the canyon wall like a waterfall of stone. Boulders the size of cars tumbled end over end. Smaller rocks filled the spaces between, creating a churning mass that buried everything in its path. The DSHK position disappeared. Not destroyed, erased. The depression where the crew had dug in became a tomb filled instantly with 30 feet of debris. The thermal blankets, the camouflage, the men, the weapon, all of it vanished beneath the crushing weight of the mountain. The landslide didn't stop there. Momentum carried it further, spilling down onto the road itself, creating a massive natural barricade just 50 meters in front of the lead Ranger vehicle. Through the scope, Reese saw brake lights flare bright red. The convoy slammed to a halt, tires locked metal, screaming against asphalt. The lead MRAP stopped so close to the debris field that dust billowed over its hood. For 3 seconds, the valley held its breath. Then the chaos began. On the flanks, the RPG teams reacted, but not with discipline, not with the coordinated professionalism they'd shown in setting up the ambush. They reacted with panic. Reese traversed her scope, scanning the positions she'd identified earlier. One of the fighters had abandoned his hide entirely, standing upright, staring at the massive dust cloud that now obscured half the valley. His RPG launcher hung forgotten at his side. He was screaming something, pointing at the rock slide. Another team was scrambling out of their spider hole, dragging their weapons, fleeing up the slope away from the road. They'd watched a mountain fall on their comrades. Whatever training they'd received, whatever discipline they'd maintained was gone now, replaced by the primal animal fear of being crushed by forces beyond comprehension. Reese allowed herself one moment of savage satisfaction. Target suppressed, the DSHK was gone. The ambush was broken. The Rangers were, the rock next to her head exploded. Stone fragments sprayed into her face, sharp as glass, cutting her cheek, her ear, her neck. She didn't hear the shot, didn't hear the rifle that fired it. She only felt the impact, felt the hammer blow of supersonic metal hitting limestone 6 inches from her skull. The counter sniper, the King's Perch position, 800 meters across the valley. He'd seen her muzzle flash, and now he was trying to kill her. Reese slammed herself flat against the rock, pressing her body into the depression of her hide. A second round hit 2 feet to her left, punching a crater in the stone. A third round hit the barrel of her rifle, still extended, slightly past her cover, jarring the weapon violently. The impacts came in a rhythm. Crack thump, crack thump. The supersonic crack of the bullet's passage, followed by the wet thump of lead meeting stone. The shooter was firing a Dragunov SVD, the Russian semi-automatic sniper rifle. Not as accurate as her bolt-action M2010, but capable of putting rounds down range much faster. He was walking his fire onto her position, using the memory of her muzzle flash to zero in. Each shot came closer. He was good, patient, professional, and Reese couldn't shoot back. She grabbed the rifle and pulled it back into cover, checking it frantically. The scope housing was dented where the bullet had struck, but the glass seemed intact. The barrel was unmarked. Functional, maybe, but her zero was almost certainly off. She couldn't trust the scope for a precision shot anymore. Another round impacted this one, hitting the lip of the overhang above her, showering her with pulverized limestone. The counter-sniper was adjusting his elevation, trying to get an angle on her position. Move now or die here. But moving meant exposing herself. The moment she left the cover of the overhang, she'd be visible. 3 counter-snipers, 3 angles of fire. At least one of them would have a clear shot. Reese risked a glance at the valley below. Through the settling dust, she could see the Ranger convoy reacting. Turrets traversed weapon systems coming online. They were scanning for threats, trying to understand what had just happened. But they weren't looking up. They were focused on the road, on the obvious danger zones. They hadn't identified the counter-sniper positions yet. She had to warn them, had to tell them where the real threat was. Reese reached for her radio, knowing it was useless, but her hand froze halfway to the handset. The static in her earpiece was gone. Not silent active. The hiss of an open channel, the carrier wave of an encrypted frequency. Repeat, this is Highlander 6, all stations report. The jammer, the vehicle-mounted electronic warfare system that had created the communications blackout. It had been positioned near the DSHK, near the command element of the ambush. And now it was buried under 1,000 tons of rock. The electromagnetic bubble had collapsed. The radios were live again. Reese grabbed the PRC-152, her fingers trembling as she keyed the transmit button. Highlander 6. Highlander 6, this is Viper 1 actual check fire on Northern Ridge, friendly position, danger close. The response was immediate, sharp, with confusion and adrenaline. Viper 1, this is Highlander. Authenticate. Who the hell are you, and how did you get on this net? Another round from the Dragunov hit the rock face closer now. The counter-sniper was getting angry, increasing his rate of fire. Reese could hear the PKM machine gun on the far right flank joining in the heavy 7.62 by 54mm rounds, chewing up the mountainside in long, traversing bursts. Highlander Viper 1 is Staff Sergeant Reese Harlow Wraith Recon Element, call sign Viper 1. I have been tracking enemy complex ambush for the last 6 hours. You just drove into a kill zone and I stopped it. Now I have 3 counter-snipers trying to end me, and I need you to suppress Sector 7, opposing ridge high left. There was a pause. 2 seconds that felt like an hour. Reese could imagine the convoy commander processing the information, trying to decide if this was real or some kind of enemy deception. Then a different voice came on the net. Older, calmer. The voice of a man who'd been doing this for 20 years and had learned to trust his instincts. Viper 1, this is Highlander 6, actual Captain Harrison Thorne. I confirm massive landslide blocking road 50 meters to my front. I confirm no enemy fire from valley floor positions. Break, you're saying you triggered that slide. Affirmative, Highlander. I shot an enemy explosives cache under geological weak point. Landslide buried their DSHK position and broke the ambush. Copy that, and you're taking effective fire from counter-snipers. 3 positions, Sector 7 through 9 opposing ridgeline. Dragunov and PKM confirmed. They have me bracketed. The longest 3 seconds of Reese's life followed. Then Thorne's voice came back, no longer questioning, but commanding. All Highlander elements, this is 6. Shift fire to opposing ridgeline sectors 7 through 9. We have a friendly sniper taking effective fire from enemy counter-sniper positions. Suppress those positions, weapons free fire for effect. The valley erupted. The Ranger convoy was equipped with some of the most sophisticated weapon systems in the American military arsenal. Each MRAP mounted either an M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun or an MK-19 automatic grenade launcher in its common remotely operated weapon station turret. The gunners, no longer confused about where the threat was, locked onto the coordinates Reese had called and opened fire. The sound was apocalyptic. The deep staccato roar of the 50 cals firing rounds the size of a human thumb at 800 rounds per minute. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the MK-19s sending 40mm high explosive grenades arcing across the valley. Reese watched through a gap in the rocks as the opposing ridgeline disintegrated. The King's Perch position, where the Dragunov shooter had been systematically trying to kill her, vanished in a chain of explosions. Grenades detonated in clusters, throwing up geysers of rock and dirt. The 50 cal rounds, designed to punch through light armor, pulverized the stone. The Dragunov fell silent. Either the shooter was dead, or he'd been forced so deep into cover that he couldn't engage. The PKM position lasted longer, the gunner desperately trying to return fire, even as the Rangers walked their suppression across his position. Reese saw the muzzle flashes, saw the tracers arcing out from the mountainside. Then an MK-19 grenade landed directly in the hide, and the position ceased to exist. The third counter-sniper, the one she'd never gotten a clear visual on, never fired. He'd seen what happened to his colleagues and made the smart choice: run or die. The suppression continued for another 30 seconds, the Rangers pouring hundreds of rounds into the opposing ridge. Overkill by any standard, but in combat, there's no such thing as too much firepower applied to a threat. Then, as suddenly as it began, the firing stopped. The valley fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the ringing in Reese's ears and the settling of disturbed dust. Viper 1, Highlander 6. Thorne's voice was steady, professional. Target area suppressed. We're pushing a squad up to your position for secure extraction. Sit tight. Reese keyed her mic, her voice rougher than she intended. Copy, Highlander. Target area cold. Advise your element to watch their step. The mountain is still angry. She slumped back against the rock, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion, the fear, the cascade of adrenaline that had kept her functional for the last 10 minutes. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing came in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the realization that she was still alive. She'd pulled the trigger expecting to die, had made peace with it, And now the universe had given her a reprieve she hadn't asked for and didn't know what to do with. A sound made her turn her head, not from the valley below where the Rangers were organizing their approach, from her flank, from the steep slope that led up to her position. Someone was climbing toward her, fast, too fast for friendly forces who would be moving with tactical caution. Reese grabbed her rifle, ignoring the pain that flared through her ribs. The scope was damaged, untrusted, so she used her iron sights, the backup aiming system mounted on the rifle's receiver. A figure emerged from the rocks 30 feet below her position. Young, maybe 19 or 20. He wore the loose-fitting clothing of a local fighter, dust-covered and ragged. He was missing a boot. Blood streaked one side of his face from a scalp wound. He carried an AK-47 gripped by the barrel, using it as a walking stick. A squirter. A survivor from one of the RPG teams fleeing the carnage, trying to get over the ridgeline before the Americans closed the net, and he'd stumbled directly into her. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. Two people who'd been trying to kill each other's comrades, now face to face, both battered, both exhausted. Then the fighter's eyes focused. He saw the American flag patch on her shoulder, saw the radio, saw the rifle. Understanding and rage flooded his face in equal measure. He shifted his grip on the AK-47, trying to bring the weapon around, trying to find the trigger. Reese's right hand went for her M9 Beretta pistol mounted in the drop leg holster on her thigh. She ripped it free, not bothering with a proper two-handed grip, no time for sight alignment, just pointing and pressing. The pistol barked, once, twice. The first round hit him in the stomach, low into the left. Not a perfect shot, not a fight-stopping hit, but enough to make him double over. The second round went wide, sparking off the rock behind him as he stumbled forward. Reese tried to fire again. The trigger pulled, but nothing happened. She looked down and saw the problem. Stovepipe jam. The spent casing from her last shot had failed to eject properly, caught between the slide and the ejection port. The pistol was dead. The fighter was still coming, still alive, still angry. He raised the AK-47 like a club, preparing to bring the heavy wooden stock down on her head. Reese tried to roll, tried to get clear, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The broken ribs, the exhaustion, the adrenaline crash, all of it conspired to make her movement sluggish, uncoordinated. She raised her left arm to block the blow, knowing it wouldn't be enough. The wooden stock was already descending when she heard the sound. A soft cough, mechanical and precise. Once, twice, thwip, thwip. The fighter's head snapped back violently. The AK-47 fell from his hands. His body followed, collapsing across her legs in a tangle of limbs. Reese stared up, trying to understand what had just happened. Standing on the crest of the ridge, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was a ranger. He wore full combat kit plate, carrier, high-cut helmet, with night vision goggles flipped up. His weapon, an MK-18 carbine with a suppressor, was still shouldered, the muzzle tracking over her position, searching for additional threats. "Clear," he shouted, his voice muffled by active hearing protection. "Clear left." "Clear right." Another voice, another ranger moving into position. The first ranger slid down the scree slope in a controlled slide, kicking up a wave of dust and loose stone. He reached Reese in 3 long strides, moving with the efficient economy of a man who'd done this 100 times. He kicked the AK-47 away from the dead fighter's reach, then knelt beside Reese. His ballistic sunglasses made it impossible to see his eyes, but his body language radiated focused concern. "Viper 1, he asked. "Yeah," Reese managed. Her voice came out as a croak. "That's me." "I'm Sergeant Blake, Tenant Bravo Company. You look like hell, ma'am." "I feel like hell." Tenant grabbed the corpse by the vest and hauled it off her legs with casual strength. Then he leaned in his gloved hands, checking her armor, checking her visible injuries, working with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done a lot of combat trauma assessment. "Where are you hit?" "Back plate. Blunt trauma, ribs bad, left shoulder's messed up." "Okay, we got you." He pulled a pressure bandage from his kit, applying it to the cuts on her face and neck where the stone fragments had sliced her. "Doc," he yelled over his shoulder, "get the litter up here. We have a package to move." More rangers appeared, 4 of them moving with tactical precision to secure the area. One of them, a medic judging by the red cross on his helmet, dropped his aid bag and began a more thorough assessment. Sergeant Harlow, the medic asked, his hands already working, checking pupils, palpating ribs. That's me. I'm going to get an IV started, give you something for the pain. We're going to move you in about 2 minutes. It's going to suck. I apologize in advance. Reese almost laughed. It came out as a wheeze. Already sucks. Can't get much worse. Oh, ma'am, it definitely can. But the medic was smiling as he said it, the gallows humor of combat medicine. He had a fentanyl lollipop out now, the field equivalent of serious pain management. Open up. This'll take the edge off. The synthetic opiate hit her system fast, spreading a warm, fuzzy blanket over the sharp edges of her pain. The ribs still hurt, but from a distance now like they belonged to someone else. Sergeant Tennant was talking into his radio, coordinating the extraction. Reese heard fragments of the conversation through the haze. Package secured. 2 mics for descent. Need immediate CASVAC at CCP. Then Tennant was looking at her again, his expression unreadable behind the sunglasses. He reached over and picked up Graham's rifle from where it lay beside her, examining it with the appreciation of someone who knew quality when he saw it. This the weapon that made that shot? He asked. Yeah. He looked at the landslide scar on the opposite valley wall, then back at the rifle, then at Reese. She could see him trying to reconcile the devastation below, with the slight, battered woman bleeding into the rocks. Ma'am, he said quietly, you just saved my entire company. We didn't even know we were walking into an ambush. That landslide, he shook his head. We thought it was an earthquake or something. Then the counter-sniper started shooting and we figured it out. Just doing my job, Sergeant. Hell of a job. He handed her the rifle, making sure she could hold it. Captain Thorne is going to want to talk to you. Personally. They strapped her into a Skedco litter, an orange plastic drag stretcher that wrapped around her body like a cocoon. The descent was exactly as bad as the medic had promised. Every bump, every slide over rough terrain sent fresh shockwaves of agony through her broken ribs despite the fentanyl. But she was moving downward toward friendly lines, toward safety, alive against all odds and all expectations. The Rangers worked with coordinated efficiency, passing the litter hand to hand down the steep slope, calling out warnings about loose rock and drop-offs. Reese stared up at the sky, watching clouds drift past her mind, floating on the chemical tide of pain medication. She thought about Graham bleeding out in the dust, pressing his rifle into her hands. 237 kills, he'd said. You make it 238. But she hadn't killed anyone with that shot. She'd killed the mountain, used geology and physics and her father's long-ago lessons to turn terrain into a weapon. Did that count? Would Graham have approved? She'd never know. But she'd saved 64 men. That had to be enough. The slope flattened out. The jolting stopped. They'd reached the valley floor. Reese turned her head, ignoring the medic's instructions to stay still, and saw the convoy. The 4 MRAPs were positioned in a defensive perimeter turrets, scanning outward. Rangers moved with purpose, securing the area, checking the ambush positions, making sure the threat was truly neutralized. The litter came to rest in the shade of the lead vehicle. Someone had set up a casualty collection point, here medical supplies laid out on a tarp. The medic was already establishing an IV line, hanging a bag of saline from a makeshift stand. And walking toward her, removing his sunglasses, was a man in his 40s, with a weathered face and the bearing of someone who'd been doing this longer than most of the Rangers in his company had been alive. Captain Harrison Thorne knelt beside the litter. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the gray starting to thread through his high and tight haircut, the quiet competence of a career officer who'd earned his rank the hard way. Viper 1, he said. It wasn't a question. Staff Sergeant Reese Harlow, sir, 2nd Recon. Captain Harrison Thorne, Bravo Company Commander. He studied her for a long moment. My boys were blind, Sergeant. Completely blind. We had no idea what we were rolling into. Intelligence said this sector was clear. Intelligence was wrong, sir. Yeah, I'm getting that. He gestured at the massive pile of debris blocking the road. That landslide. That was you. You triggered that. Yes, sir. Shot an enemy explosives cache positioned under a geological weak point. The blast propagated through a fault line in the limestone. The cliff face sheared off. Thorne looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. You calculated that under fire with counter-snipers hunting you. My father was a mining engineer, sir. He taught me to read rock formations. I saw the weakness in the structure and exploited it. Jesus Christ. Thorne rubbed his face, the gesture of a man trying to process information that didn't fit his understanding of the world. The range on that shot had to be, what, 800 meters? 1,000, sir. 1,000 meters, downward angle, wind, moving target. No, wait, the target wasn't moving, but you're saying you were aiming at a specific crate of explosives to get the blast vector you needed. Bottom crate, sir, to channel the force upward into the keystone. Thorne was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and gripped her hand, his calloused fingers squeezing hers with a pressure that conveyed more than words ever could. Sergeant Harlow, you saved 64 lives today. 64 men who are going to go home to their families because you saw what no one else saw and had the balls to pull the trigger. His voice dropped, becoming more personal. My son was in that lead vehicle, Private Ethan Whitmore Thorne. He's 20 years old. You gave him a future. Reese felt something catch in her throat. Any sniper would have done the same, sir. No, they wouldn't. Most wouldn't have seen the solution, and the ones who saw it wouldn't have had the balls to take the shot. He paused, searching for words. That's the kind of thing we give medals for. He stood, his professional mask sliding back into place. Medic, what's her status? 2 broken ribs, possible shoulder dislocation, multiple lacerations, moderate dehydration. She needs a real hospital, sir, but she's stable for transport. Good. Get her in the lead vehicle. We're moving RTB and 5 mics. I want this convoy out of this valley before the enemy regroups. He looked down at Reese one more time. We've got you now, Sergeant. Rest. They lifted the litter, carrying her toward the massive MRAP. As they loaded her into the vehicle's interior, Reese saw a young ranger approaching. He'd removed his helmet, and for a disorienting moment, she saw her brother's face staring back at her. Ma'am, the young ranger's voice pulled her back to reality. Are you Viper 1? Yeah. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm Ethan Whitmore Thorne, Captain Thorne's son. He looked young, uncertain, overwhelmed. They're saying you saved us, that you triggered the landslide that blocked the ambush. I did. Ethan swallowed hard. Thank you. I don't know what else to say, just thank you. Reese looked at him, at this young man who wore her brother's face, who'd been given the future that Daniel never got. She wanted to say something profound, something meaningful. What came out was, keep your head down, soldier. He smiled, a brief flash of humor in the tension. Yes, ma'am. The MRAP's ramp closed with a hydraulic hiss, shutting out the light in the valley and the carnage. Inside, it was cool and dark, lit only by red tactical lights. The engine rumbled to life, vibrating through the armored hull. Reese lay on the stretcher, secured to the floor, and let her eyes close. The fentanyl was pulling her down into a warm darkness where pain couldn't follow. Her last conscious thought was of Graham's rifle, which someone had carefully secured beside her. She reached out with her good hand, finding the stock, running her fingers over the wood. 238, she thought. We made it 238, Graham. Did I do it right? Did I make you proud? The answer, if there was one, was lost in the darkness as unconsciousness claimed her. The convoy began to move, engines growling, heading back toward base. Behind them, the valley lay quiet. The only sound, the wind moving through the scattered rocks, singing its eternal song over the bones of men who'd chosen the wrong mountain to die on. The pain returned before consciousness did. It started as a dull throb in Reese's ribs, a rhythmic pulse that matched her heartbeat. Then came the sharper sensation in her shoulder, a grinding ache that suggested bones weren't sitting where they belonged. The cuts on her face stung tight with dried blood and antiseptic. She opened her eyes to white ceiling tiles and the antiseptic smell of a military hospital. Bagram Airfield Medical Ward. She recognized it from the briefings. This was where they sent the wounded who weren't critical enough for immediate medevac to Germany, but too broken to return to duty. The room was aggressively sterile. White walls, beige linoleum, the hum of air conditioning working overtime against the Afghan heat. Through the window, she could see a slice of blue sky and the brown mountains in the distance, hazy with dust. How long had she been out? Reese tried to sit up. Her body vetoed the decision immediately, sending sharp protests from multiple injury sites. She settled for turning her head, taking inventory of her situation. Her left arm was immobilized in a sling held tight against her chest. Her ribs were wrapped in compression, bandaging so tight that each breath was a negotiation. An IV line ran into her right arm, connected to a bag of clear fluid hanging from a stand. Heart rate monitor, blood pressure cuff, the full medical surveillance package. On the table beside the bed sat a collection of items that hadn't been there when she'd passed out. Challenge coins from various Ranger units, a hand-carved wooden plaque with Bravo Company's insignia, a folded American flag, and Graham's rifle carefully cleaned and oiled, propped against the wall where she could see it. The door opened. A nurse entered, early 30s, with the efficient movements of someone who'd seen too many wounded soldiers to be fazed by one more. Good, you're awake. She checked the monitors, made notes on a tablet. How's the pain scale of 1 to 10? 7. It was actually closer to 9, but admitting that would mean more medication, more fog, more time in this bed when she needed to understand what had happened. Your vitals are stable. 2 cracked ribs, left shoulder was dislocated, but we reduced it, multiple lacerations that we cleaned and sutured. You're lucky. Could have been a lot worse. Lucky, the word felt strange. She'd expected to die on that mountain. Everything since pulling the trigger was borrowed time. How long have I been here? 72 hours. They kept you sedated for the first 48 while the swelling went down. You're healing well. The nurse adjusted the IV flow. You've had visitors. A lot of them, Rangers mostly. We had to set up a rotation because they were overcrowding the ward. Visitors. They've been calling you the White Witch, the woman who shot the mountain. The nurse smiled slightly. You're something of a legend already, Sergeant Harlow. Before Reese could process that, the door opened again. This time it was a man in his late 40s wearing the insignia of a major, carrying a leather folder. His hands were soft, uncalloused. An intelligence officer, not a field operative. Sergeant Harlow, I'm Major Vaughn Kessler, Task Force Intelligence. I need to debrief you on the events of 3 days ago. He pulled up a chair, opened the folder. Specifically, I need to understand exactly what you encountered in Argendab Valley. Reese forced herself more upright, ignoring her body's protests. My team was hit during a dust storm. EMP device killed our electronics. Master Sergeant Aldridge and 3 others KIA. I was separated, made it to high ground, identified enemy ambush positions waiting for a convoy. The landslide. Walk me through that decision. She did, laying out the tactical calculus with the clinical precision of an after-action report. The impossibility of warning the convoy. The counter-sniper positions that made direct engagement suicide. The geological weakness she'd identified. The shot placement and the physics that followed. Kessler listened without interrupting, making notes. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. We've surveyed the site, he said finally. Combat engineers went over every inch. They confirm your assessment. The limestone formation was inherently unstable, held in place by that single keystone spur. Your shot triggered a structural failure that geologists say was probably decades away from happening naturally. He looked up from his notes. They also said that calculating that shot under pressure with enemy fire incoming represents a level of geological knowledge and tactical creativity that's unprecedented. My father was a mining engineer. Yes, we pulled your file. Morgan Harlow died in a mine collapse in Nevada, 2006. Kessler's expression softened slightly. He taught you well. He taught me to see what the rock wants to do. I just gave it permission. Well, your permission buried a DSHK crew, scattered 4 RPG teams, and saved 64 American lives. Kessler pulled out photographs, spreading them on the bed. Aerial shots of the ambush site. We recovered 14 enemy KIA from under that rock slide. The DSHK was a Soviet-era DSHK-38, well-maintained. The thermal blankets and electronic warfare equipment suggest funding well beyond local Taliban capability. He pulled out another photo. Bodies laid out for identification. Reese forced herself to look. These 3, Kessler tapped the images, are Chechen, foreign fighters, professional soldiers who came here to kill Americans. The counter-snipers you identified were equipped with Dragunov SVDs, PKM machine guns, high-end optics. This wasn't a random ambush. This was a deliberate trap set by people who knew what they were doing. And they were waiting for someone specific. We think they were waiting for any high-value target. Ranger convoy, special forces element, maybe a VIP transport. They had enough firepower to destroy anything short of an armored battalion. Kessler gathered the photos. You stumbled into their trap and turned it into their grave. He pulled out one final document, official letterhead dense with military jargon. This is the after-action report for Operation Phantom Eye. It details Master Sergeant Aldridge's death, the loss of your team, and your subsequent actions. He slid it across to her. Read it. Reese scanned the document. The language was clinical, bureaucratic. Wraith team encountered enemy force during adverse weather conditions. 4 KIA. SSG Harlow conducted solo reconnaissance, identified enemy complex ambush, utilized terrain analysis and precision fire to neutralize threat. Bravo Company convoy safely extracted with 0 casualties. It's accurate, she said. It's also going into your personnel file along with a Bronze Star with Valor device. The citation is being written now. Bronze Star, one of the highest decorations for combat valor. Reese had seen men receive it posthumously, heard about the ceremonies, the families accepting folded flags. She'd never imagined wearing one herself. Sir, I don't need, yes you do. Kessler's voice was firm. What you did up there was extraordinary. The Army needs to recognize it. Your fellow soldiers need to see it recognized. And frankly, after what happened to your team, you've earned it twice over. He stood closing the folder. You'll be here another week for medical observation. After that, light duty for 6 weeks while the ribs heal. Then you're back on the roster. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, Sergeant Graham Aldridge trained a lot of snipers. He was legendary in the community. The fact that he gave you his rifle, that he trusted you with his legacy, tells me everything I need to know about your capability. After he left, Reese lay back against the pillows staring at Graham's rifle. 237 notches in the stock. She'd added the 38th herself with her K-bar knife during the convoy ride back to base, carved it deep into the wood before unconsciousness took her. But it felt wrong. She hadn't killed a person with that shot. She'd killed a mountain. Did that count? Should it? The door opened again. She was starting to hate that door. This time it was Captain Thorne out of uniform for once wearing civilian clothes. He carried a small cardboard box under one arm. Sergeant Harlow. He set the box on the table. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, sir. Yeah, blunt force trauma to armor plate will do that. He pulled up the chair Kessler had vacated. I wanted to come by earlier, but they had you sedated. Needed to say some things in person. Sir, you don't need to. Yes, I do. His voice was quiet but firm. 3 days ago, you saved my son's life. Ethan is my only child. His mother died when he was 12. He's all I have left in this world. If that convoy had hit that ambush, he stopped collecting himself. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know how ambushes work. I've seen the aftermath. We would have been annihilated. Reese didn't know what to say. What do you say to a father whose son you'd saved without ever intending to, without even knowing he existed? Ethan wanted to come with me, Thorne continued. I told him no, wanted to do this alone first. He opened the cardboard box. Inside was a chunk of limestone roughly the size of a softball mounted on a polished wooden base. A brass plaque was affixed to the front. 1405 Zulu, one shot 60 lives. Ethan picked this up from the debris field, asked me if it was appropriate to give to you. I told him it was perfect. Thorne set the mounted rock on her bedside table. The men are calling that spot Harlow's Hammer now, the site where one woman with one rifle broke an entire ambush. They're calling me the White Witch, I heard. Some of the younger guys, yeah, the ones who think everything extraordinary has to be magic or technology. Thorne smiled. The older guys, the ones who've been around, they know better. They know it was skill, discipline, the willingness to make an impossible shot knowing you'd probably die right after. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something else, a small box velvet. He opened it to reveal a challenge coin, but this one was different from the others on her table. Older, worn smooth by decades of handling. This was my father's, Colonel James Thorne, Korean War. He carried it through the chosen reservoir, through 3 tours, through everything the Army threw at him. Thorne held it up to the light. He was old school, very old school. Didn't think women belonged in combat roles. Thought it would compromise unit cohesion, undermine standards, all the arguments you've probably heard 1,000 times. Reese had heard them. From instructors, from peers, from the quiet doubt in her own head during the hardest moments of training. He died 5 years ago, Thorne continued. Never got to see what the modern military has become. Never got to see soldiers like you. He placed the coin in her hand, closing her fingers around it. If he'd been alive to see what you did up there, if he'd seen the shot you made and the discipline you showed, he would have been the first one to salute. Old warriors recognize real warriors regardless of what package they come in. The coin was warm from his pocket, heavy with history and meaning. Reese felt something break in her chest, some wall she'd been holding up since Graham died. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sergeant. Thorne stood. One more thing. I have Master Sergeant Aldridge's personal effects. His widow asked me to deliver something to you. He pulled out an envelope, standard military issue sealed with wax. Reese's name was written on the front in Graham's precise handwriting. He wrote this before the mission. Standard procedure for him, apparently. Always wrote letters to be opened if he didn't make it back. Thorne set it on the table. I'll leave you alone to read it. After he left, Reese stared at the envelope for a long time. The last words of a dead man written with the foreknowledge that he might not return. What could Graham possibly have to say to her from beyond the grave? Finally, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was Graham's, but looser than his usual precision. Written quickly, maybe, or with emotion. Reese, if you're reading this, I'm dead and you're probably blaming yourself. Stop. I'm a 62-year-old man who's been tempting fate for 40 years. The odds were always going to catch up eventually. I'm writing this because I need you to understand something. When I first got orders to train you and your brother, I was pissed. Female snipers. The Army was playing politics, I thought, setting me up to babysit some diversity initiative that would wash out in the first week. I was wrong. You proved me wrong in the first 3 days. Daniel was good. You were better. You saw things he didn't see. Angles, patterns, the way terrain flows and breaks. It's not something you can teach. You either have the eye or you don't. You have it. By the time you graduated sniper school, I knew you were the best shooter I'd ever trained. But I also knew the Army wasn't ready to admit it. Too many old men like me who think the world still works the way it did. Too many people invested in keeping things the way they've always been. So I'm giving you my rifle. 237 confirmed kills. Each one of them was necessary. Each one saved American lives. The 238th shot is yours. Make it count. Make it mean something. And when people doubt you, when they say women don't belong in the field, when they question your capability, you remember this. I trusted you with my life, with my weapon, with my legacy. Old warriors don't give that trust lightly. Make the shot they said was impossible. Prove them all wrong. Graham Reese read it twice, then a third time, her vision blurring at the edges. She folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest. I made the shot, she whispered to the empty room. I made it count. I hope that's enough. The next 3 days passed in a blur of visitors. Rangers from Bravo Company bringing gifts and gratitude. Medics checking her progress. Physical therapists starting the long process of rehabilitation. The hospital chaplain asking if she needed to talk about what happened. She didn't. Talking made it real, and she wasn't ready for it to be real yet. On the 5th day, a new visitor arrived. An older woman, early 60s, with gray hair, pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that had seen their share of grief. Sergeant Harlow, I'm Lydia Aldridge, Graham's widow. Reese struggled to sit up straight in her. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. He was... I know what he was. Lydia's voice was gentle but firm. He was a warrior. He was a mentor. He was a man who died doing what he loved, training the next generation. She sat down studying Reese with an intensity that reminded her painfully of Graham. Captain Thorne told me what happened, what Graham did before he died, giving you his rifle. He said to make it 238, the kills. And did you so? Reese hesitated. I shot an explosives cache, triggered a landslide that killed 14 enemy fighters and saved a convoy. Does that count? Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled and it transformed her face. Graham would have loved that, not shooting people, shooting the mountain itself, using geology as a weapon. She reached out and took Reese's hand. He saw something special in you. In the 40 years I knew him, he only said that about 3 people. You were one of them. I don't feel special. I feel like I got lucky. Luck is what people call skill when they don't want to give credit. Lydia stood pulling something from her purse. A photograph, old and faded. It showed a younger Graham in dress uniform standing with another soldier. That's Graham with your father. Did you know they served together briefly in the 80s? Morgan was a combat engineer. Graham was a young sniper. They worked together, clearing Soviet mines in Lebanon. Reese stared at the photo. Her father and Graham, both young, both alive, both looking at the camera with the confidence of men who thought they were immortal. Graham, I know your father taught you geology. He told me once that Morgan Harlow could read ground better than any engineer he'd ever met. Said Morgan saw the bones of the earth, understood how things held together, and how they fell apart. Lydia tucked the photo back into her purse. Your father taught you to see the mountain. Graham taught you to shoot. You combined both skills and did something neither of them could have imagined. That's not luck. That's legacy. She moved toward the door, then paused. Keep the rifle. Graham wanted you to have it. Use it well, honorably. And when you're done with it, pass it to someone else who deserves it. That's how legacies work. They're not about the individual. They're about what we build that outlasts us. After Lydia left, Reese sat in the quiet room thinking about legacies and fathers and the weight of weapons that carried history in every notch and scratch. She thought about Daniel dead at 24, buried with full honors in a cemetery she'd only visited once because looking at his gravestone made the loss too real. She thought about her father crushed under a mountain because someone didn't trust his expertise, didn't listen when he said the ceiling was unstable. She thought about Graham bleeding out in the dust, using his last breath to push her forward, to make her believe she was capable of the impossible. 3 men who'd shaped her. 3 men who were gone. But their lessons remained. A week later, Reese was cleared for transport. Not back to her unit, not yet. The ribs needed another month to heal properly. But she was stable enough to leave Bagram, and there was somewhere she needed to go. The C-130 transport flight took her to Kabul, then a smaller plane to Germany, then finally a military charter to Washington. Each leg of the journey was painful, the broken ribs protesting every moment of turbulence, but she'd refused the heavy pain medications. She needed to be clear-headed for this. Arlington National Cemetery was green in a way that Afghanistan never was. Grass and trees and carefully maintained headstones stretching in perfect rows across rolling hills. It was beautiful, peaceful. Everything war wasn't. She found Daniel's grave in Section 60, the area reserved for casualties from Iraq and Afghanistan. The headstone was simple white marble, standard military issue. PFC Daniel Morgan Harlow, United States Army, September 15, 1985. August 3, 2009. Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Beloved son and brother Reese stood there for a long time, her left arm still in a sling, her ribs wrapped tight under her uniform. She'd worn her dress blues for this, despite the pain of getting into them. Daniel deserved that respect. Hey, Danny, her voice was rough. Sorry it took me so long to visit. I've been busy. The graves didn't answer. They never did. I made the shot, the one Graham trained us for, the impossible one. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the challenge coin Thorne had given her. Saved 64 men. One of them looked just like you. Same age, same build, same stupid optimism that nothing bad could happen. The wind moved through the trees, rustling leaves. I know why you joined the army after Dad died. Same reason I did. We were both trying to prove he was right. That expertise matters. That seeing what others don't see is worth something. She knelt beside the headstone, ignoring the protest from her ribs. I saw what you didn't see that day. I saw the ambush. And I stopped it. Used geology, used Dad's lessons, used everything Graham taught us. I think you'd be proud. She placed the challenge coin on the grave next to the flowers someone else had left recently. Their mother probably still making the pilgrimage, even after 3 years. I'm going back. Not right away, but soon. They're making me an instructor. Advanced sniper course at Fort Benning. Graham's old position. She smiled despite the tears. They said I'm too valuable to risk in the field anymore. Too much knowledge, too much skill. They want me to pass it on. Standing hurt, but she did it anyway. Military bearing even alone among the dead. I'll make sure they remember you. Every class I teach, I'll tell them about PFC Daniel Harlow, who died because his Overwatch failed him. And I'll make damn sure that failure never happens again. That's my promise to you. She saluted, holding it longer than regulation required, then turned and walked away. Behind her, the challenge coin glinted in the afternoon sun, a circle of metal and meaning left on the grave of a brother who would never grow old. 18 months later, Fort Benning, Georgia. The advanced sniper course had been Graham's domain for a decade. Now it was Reese's. The classroom held 52 students representing various Army units, a few Marines, even 2 Air Force Special Tactics operators. They sat at long tables, field notebooks open, every eye locked on the instructor at the front of the room. Sergeant First Class Reese Harlow stood beside a rifle mounted on a display stand. Graham's M2010 cleaned and oiled, looking exactly as it had the day he'd pressed it into her hands in the dust. "This rifle," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room without shouting, "has 238 confirmed kills. 237 were made by Master Sergeant Graham Aldridge, over 20 years of service. He was one of the finest snipers this country has ever produced." She paused, making eye contact with several students. 6 of them were women, a record number for this course. They sat straighter when she looked at them, understanding without words what her presence meant. "The 238th kill was mine. I made that shot in Argandab Valley, August 2011. Range 1,000 meters. Target, a Soviet-era explosives cache positioned beneath an unstable geological formation. The goal wasn't to kill the enemy directly, it was to weaponize the terrain itself." She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. Satellite imagery of the valley marked with positions and angles. The students leaned forward, absorbing every detail. The shot triggered a landslide that buried an enemy machine gun position and broke a complex ambush. 64 American soldiers survived because I understood that sometimes the best way to neutralize a threat isn't to shoot the person. It's to shoot what the person is standing under. A hand went up. Private First Class Sloan Mercer, 23, one of the female students. "Sergeant, before you took that shot, did you doubt yourself? Did you think about missing?" Reese considered the question. Honest answers were part of teaching. Every second, doubt is normal, doubt is healthy. It keeps you sharp, makes you check your math twice, forces you to consider alternatives. She moved away from the rifle, closer to the students. "But when 64 lives depend on your calculation, doubt can't pull the trigger. Training does. Discipline does. Trust in your craft does." Another hand. "How did you know the geology would work, that the mountain would fall the way you predicted?" "My father was a mining engineer. He taught me to read rock formations to see stress points and fault lines. I combined that knowledge with my sniper training and made an educated prediction." She pulled up another image showing the cliff face before and after. "Could I have been wrong?" "Absolutely, but being wrong meant the same outcome as not shooting at all, so I took the shot." The class continued for another hour, diving deep into the technical aspects of the engagement. Wind reading at extreme range, calculating bullet drop on steep angles, the psychology of making life or death decisions under pressure. When it ended, several students approached with questions. Reese answered each one patiently, remembering how Graham had done the same for her, never rushing, always treating every question as if it mattered. Because it did. Every question was someone trying to learn the skills that might save lives someday. Sloan Mercer was the last to approach, hanging back until the others had dispersed. "Sergeant, can I ask you something off the record?" "Go ahead." "Some guys in my unit say women don't have what it takes for this work, that we don't have the cold blood to take a life." She looked young, uncertain. "Is that true? Do we have to be cold?" Reese thought about Graham bleeding out, about Daniel's grave, about the 14 men buried under a mountain who would never go home. "I've taken 12 lives in combat," she said quietly. "Every single one haunts me. I remember their faces. I think about their families. I wonder what they might have been if circumstances had been different." She met Sloane's eyes. "But you know what would haunt me more? Not taking the shot when brothers and sisters are depending on me. The rifle doesn't care about your gender. It cares about your skill, your discipline, and your courage to pull the trigger when it counts. So we don't need cold blood. No, we need professional competence. We need the ability to make hard choices and live with the consequences. That's not cold blood. That's what separates soldiers from everyone else. Reese gestured at the rifle on the stand. Master Sergeant Aldridge wasn't cold. He was professional. He did terrible things to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. That's the job. It's never easy. If it ever becomes easy, you need to find different work. Sloan nodded slowly, processing. Thank you, Sergeant. That helps. After she left, Reese stood alone in the empty classroom, looking at Graham's rifle. 238 notches. 238 stories of decisions made at distance, lives ended to preserve other lives. The brass plaque mounted below the rifle told the official story: M2010, Enhanced Sniper Rifle, Master Sergeant Graham Aldridge, USA Sergeant, First Class Reese Harlow, USA 238, Confirmed Kills, 2001-2012. Excellence in the profession of arms. But the real story was more complicated. It was about a mining engineer who taught his daughter to read the bones of the earth, about a twin brother who died too young, about a mentor who believed in capability over politics, about a single impossible shot that saved 64 lives and ended 14 others. It was about the weight of weapons and the cost of competence. Reese reached out and touched the stock, feeling the smooth wood worn by decades of use. Someday another student would stand here. Someone who showed the same potential, she'd shown the same ability to see what others missed. And she would hand them this rifle just as Graham had handed it to her. She would tell them the stories, teach them the lessons, push them to be better than they thought possible. That was how legacies worked. Not through individual achievement, but through the chain of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The door opened. Captain Harrison Thorne walked in, also in uniform, now recently promoted to major. He'd been teaching at the infantry school, crossing paths with Reese regularly. "Still talking to the rifle?" he asked with a slight smile. "It's a good listener." "That it is." He came to stand beside her, looking at the weapon. "Ethan graduates Ranger School next month. He wanted me to invite you to the ceremony. Said you're the reason he's there." "I just pulled a trigger. He did the rest." "Reese, you're going to have to get better at accepting gratitude. People want to thank you. Let them." She sighed. "I'm working on it. Work harder." He pulled out a folder. "Also, this came through today. You're being considered for Master Sergeant. Early promotion. The board wants you to take over the entire sniper program within 2 years. That's Graham's legacy. I'm not. You're exactly qualified. You've trained 63 snipers in 18 months. 15 of them are already deployed, making a difference. Your methods work. Your teaching works." He set the folder down. "Graham started something. You're continuing it. And when you're done, someone else will continue it after you. That's how we win. Not through individual heroics, but through building systems that outlast us." After he left, Reese stood at the window, watching the sunset over the training ranges. In the distance, she could see a group of students practicing on Range 14, the same range where Graham had first taught her to read Wind Mirage. One of the students, she recognized Sloane's stance even from here, was setting up for a long-range shot. The girl's movements were careful, methodical. Professional. Reese smiled. Tomorrow she'd take them out to the 800-meter line. Next week, the 1,000. By the end of the course, they'd understand what Graham had taught her, that precision wasn't about being fearless. It was about being disciplined enough to act despite the fear. She picked up Graham's rifle from the display stand, running her hand along the stock one more time before locking it in the armory for the night. 238 notches. And counting. After he left, Reese packed up her materials, preparing for the next class. Tomorrow she'd take a new group of students to the range, teaching them wind reading, teaching them to see what the Mirage was telling them about the invisible rivers of air. She'd teach them that precision isn't about being cold. It's about being disciplined, about making hard choices and living with the consequences. She'd teach them to be professionals. As she locked up the classroom and walked out into the Georgia evening, she thought about the valley, about the mountain that had fallen, about the men who'd lived and the men who'd died, and the thin line between heroism and tragedy. They said the shot was impossible. 1,000 meters switching winds downward angle with 3 enemy snipers hunting her. But she'd made it because she'd seen what no one else saw, because Graham had trained her, because her father had taught her, because Daniel's death had given her purpose. The shot wasn't about her. It was about 64 men who deserved to go home. When you focused on the mission instead of the fear, impossible became inevitable. That wasn't heroism. That was professionalism. And that was what won wars. She got in her car and drove off base, heading home to a small apartment she barely spent time in. On the passenger seat sat Graham's rifle secured in its case. She took it home every night, cleaned it, maintained it, kept it ready. Someday she'd pass it on, but not yet. For now, it was her responsibility, her burden, her legacy. 238 confirmed kills, 238 decisions made at distance, and every single one of them mattered. The evening sun painted the Georgia sky in shades of orange and purple colors that reminded her of the Hindu Kush at sunset. The mountains where she'd learned what she was capable of, where she'd become something more than just a soldier following orders. She'd become the ghost in the high places, the shooter who saw what others couldn't see, the woman who dropped a mountain to save her brothers. And tomorrow she'd teach others to do the same. That was enough. That would always be enough.